Hey folks, it's time now for our guest speaker today. Some of you may know him, those that were here in 2013. Yeah, it's a long time.
Last decade.
No. I recognise him straight away. Yeah, Dr Gary Ellem from the University of Newcastle. When he was here previously, we talked a lot about the advent of electric cars and you know, some newfangled things like that. He's now going to progress and tell us what sort of comes after that. He's also changed his position a little bit, but I think the best one to talk about that is Dr Ellem himself. So if you'd like to put your hands together for Dr Gary Ellem.
If it's okay, I'll just use my big room voice. Is that okay? Everyone can hear me up the back? Fantastic. So last time I was here, I gave you a presentation called The Future is Electric. Who was the last one I can remember? Only like 7 years ago or something. Yeah, okay. So I was searching in my computer, you know, anything computer powers, one presentation. Oh, that would be fantastic. Okay. So what we're going to do today, just a bit of a highlight. I'm a conjoint academic at the University of Newcastle at the moment. What does that mean? Well, the universities are kind of interesting places. When they have someone who's kind of like doing interesting stuff and they want to stay associated with, they say, can you be a conjoint academic or an honorary academic? So sort of you have all the privileges of an academic, they just don't pay you any money. So, so that's actually really good for me. I like that because it gives me access to all the university systems and I can talk to students and a whole bunch of other stuff, which is kind of fun. So I'm still associated with the university, but actually my full-time job now is working for these guys. So this is iSeeVC Pty Ltd. We do some interesting technology in virtual reality, and so we'll talk about that a little bit later on in the presentation. We'll talk about what we're kind of doing now. So last time I gave you a talk on the future is electric, and then we talked about the electric vehicles were coming. There's lots of different kinds of electric vehicles were coming. Why are electric vehicles coming? What makes them suddenly exciting? Why is everyone interested in them? And so this gives us an opportunity to step back into that very quickly and see how were our predictions going. Were we on track or were we completely off somewhere else? And then we're going to go on to the next thing, which is really, we'll show you how the electric vehicle stuff is interesting, but in some cases what's coming up is how computers and data actually hit transport. And then from out of that, we'll then talk about the next thing about what if you didn't need to travel at all and you could meet with people a long way away without traveling in a nice intuitive way, and that's where the stuff around virtual reality comes in. So we'll do this sort of transition from electric vehicles all the way to really hardcore computer stuff, which is virtual reality. Sounds good? Right, drummers? Okay, stick with me, it'll be good. Right, yeah, so last time in 2013 we were talking about what are the really big things that are coming and why electric vehicles were coming in, and there are a combination of things like the oil price is changing, which makes petrol cars more expensive, and batteries are getting much cheaper, which means electric cars are getting cheaper. So if you think about electricity per sort of like amount of energy, electricity is actually much cheaper than petrol. But the battery pack you need for a car is much more expensive. So a car is like has quite expensive fuel, but very inexpensive fuel tank, whereas an electric car actually has a very expensive fuel tank, but very cheap fuel. And so what you need to do is reduce the cost of the fuel tank and the cost of the fuel to be able to connect the two together. So this was oil price, so basically that, last time we met around 20, even slightly earlier, there'd been this historic low oil price going along, and then in some ways we've actually reached the end of the cheap and easy oil. And so as we reach the end of the cheap and easy oil, the oil prices come up. So that's made petrol cars more expensive. It means every time you go to the Bowser and want some more petrol, yes, some of that you pay in tax, but a lot of that is actually because the oil price, the actual cost of getting the oil out of the ground has increased. At the same time, we were talking about here is this sort of model for where we thought battery prices were going, and eventually that means there'll be a crossover, and that means that electric cars will actually be cheaper to buy and operate than petrol cars, and so everyone by default will just want an electric car just because they're cheaper and better. Okay, so the question is, when was that going to happen? So let's have a look at the predictions. So we thought the oil price might stay high. What's actually happened? Well, the oil price has actually dropped down a little bit. So it's actually not quite up in this range that it used to be. It's come down a little bit, and that's mainly because we've actually the next generation of oil extraction has started to appear. And that's mainly been in the USA. And so in the USA, they're getting something called shale oil and shale gas. You've heard about all that fracking stuff and that kind of stuff. Well, that's actually going really quite well in the US at this point in time, to the point where now the US is almost the world's, and depending on when you look at it, is the world's biggest oil producer. So they've shifted from being the world's biggest oil importer, which is why they were so obsessed about the Middle East, because that's where the oil was coming from. And now they're actually basically satisfied their own oil demand through their own domestic production, and even thinking about exporting oil. Okay, so it's been a massive shift. That's why the US is no longer so interested in the Middle East anymore. They're having to pivot to Asia kind of thing, because they're not too worried about that. They're worried more about manufacturing now, so they're pivoting to Asia. And why the American economy is bouncing back in droves and looking really good, it's because now they're not actually have all that money leaking out of the economy to buy oil all the time. They're buying it domestically. Okay, which then influences electoral cycles, because of course it's much easier to get re-elected when the economy is going well. And so all of this stuff impacts on a whole bunch of things that are happening in the US. Okay, so that's where oil is. So oil is still more expensive than it used to be, but not at the very scary levels, and that's because there's some new sources of oil coming into the market. So how do we go for the batteries? If you have a look at batteries, batteries are actually pretty much meeting our expectations in terms of the cost of production. That cost of production is still coming down that cost curve, and is actually slightly beating the predictions of where we thought the price of batteries might be at this point in time. So the batteries things is getting much cheaper, and that's when you compare the oil price, and so the oil price is still a bit elevated, so it looks like that crossover is still going to occur, which is why every major car manufacturer on the planet pretty much has an electric vehicle program up and running. It's the big trouble. If you want to make a few electric cars, that's okay, but if you now suddenly need to make all the cars electric, what you have to do is ramp up the battery manufacturing capability. And so at the moment, people are scrambling to build more battery manufacturing factories, because we have to actually accelerate the rate of battery manufacturing growth. Cool. Okay, so are we still on track for the electric vehicle? The answer is yes. It's still heading our way. Everyone's moving in that direction, and so you'll see more hybrid and then electric vehicles coming onto the market. Why was that? It's because electric vehicles are better in every way if you can make them work. Okay, so electric motors are quieter, they're more efficient, they're more reliable. You know, on almost every single metric, you tick the box. Electric motor actually outcompetes the petrol motor. The issue is the fuel tank. The fuel tank for a petrol car is very cheap, but the fuel is expensive. The fuel tank for an electric car is very expensive, but the fuel is cheap. Okay, and as that cost comes down, we'll fuel. So, at the end of 2013, I gave a bit of advice, and I said if you want to get an electric vehicle right now, the best electric vehicle you can get is actually this one here, which is an electric bicycle. Why? Because it has a whole bunch of health benefits at the same time. It's actually very cheap. It's a really good way to move around the place. And that's sort of cost economic now. So I'd say that's still a good prediction. Still go and get an electric bicycle if you're looking at getting a bicycle. And we're seeing lots of now all the major bicycle manufacturers are starting to make electric bicycles, so you can go down and buy very high quality electric bicycles that are quite expensive, but they're very high quality. And some of the car manufacturers are now also building electric bicycles as well, which is kind of interesting. Okay, so you'll see a lot of people, if you go to somewhere like Glenrock Reserve, you see a lot of mountain bikers riding around, and you'll see this whole new age category of people 50 and older who are actually still out there, still riding their electric bikes. They're going, that's great. I can be out here still riding around. I can keep up with, like my grandkids and my son and stuff when we want to go for a ride. And so it keeps them active out and having a great time out in the environment. Sometimes you'll also see couples where, like the guy's a keen cyclist and wants to keep cycling. The wife wants to keep along but doesn't want to, thrash themselves. So she'll get an electric bike and so she can ride along with the husband. Okay. And then sometimes you'll have, you've heard of mammals, middle-aged men in lycra. So you'll see these groups of older guys who like to go for a ride together. So it's a really good social experience, nice and healthy going for a ride. And then one of the guys might have had a heart attack or something, and so can no longer keep up with the group. And so instead of being isolated from that social group, now gets an electric bike, so they can still go riding. They're still part of the social group. They still get some, like an electric bike doesn't do all the work for you. There's still work to do. And for electric bike, well, in bike land, it's sort of like a saying, like it doesn't get easier, you just go faster. Okay, so if you buy a faster bike, it doesn't actually go easier, you just end up riding faster. So it never gets easier. So even though you have an electric bike, you can now go faster for the same amount of effort, and so you can keep up with your group of friends. So there's all these reasons why people are buying electric bikes, and most electric bikes are actually being bought in the 50 and older category in Australia for recreational purposes, which is interesting. Okay. We also talked about this other kind of transport that was coming. So that other kind of transport that was coming is the autonomous vehicle. And this particular one here, so that's a vehicle that can drive itself, so you don't have to be the driver anymore. And this is a particular kind of vehicle, and that's ones that once the car can drive itself, maybe you don't have to own the car anymore. Maybe you can just call the car, and just like you call a taxi, call the car on your phone, it arrives, you get in the car, it takes you where you want to go. So this is one of the first kinds of transport that can actually compete with the private passenger car on costs and convenience for people that live in suburban environments. Now, at the moment, if you live in a suburban environment, you have a car. Why? Because the bus is too inconvenient, like a taxi is too expensive, all of those kind of things, and so you end up, it's much more convenient to pay the premium of having a private car. And why do you pay for that premium? Why do you pay all that expense on a private car? Because you can get a bigger house for less money. So the car actually gives you access to a bigger home for less money, which is why we have the suburbs. Okay, this is the first new sort of technology that's coming along that might mean that you can give up your private passenger car and still have the same access to convenience while you're living in a suburban environment. So that's why it's an interesting technology. Okay, so let's see where we've gone so far in the Newcastle area. So Newcastle, we've got a few updates. One of those is we now have a tram, or a light rail, depending on how you like to say it. That's a little bit interesting, that one. So of course the cost of laying a tram is mostly in the laying of the track. The trams are not that expensive, but the track is very expensive to lay. And so that makes rolling out of the tram technology quite expensive around the place, because you have to actually reinforce all of the roadways and build this stuff and make it ultra smooth so the tram doesn't bounce up or down. And so it costs quite a lot of money to actually roll out the track. The trams themselves are not that expensive. These particular trams are a little bit interesting. You'll see up in the picture at the moment, and if you've been looking at all, there's these little Atlas stations. This little pantograph comes up and connects and recharges itself. So these trams actually don't quite run on battery power, they actually run on ultra capacitors. Has anyone heard of an ultra capacitor before? One or two people? Okay, so there's two ways of storing electrical energy. One way of storing electrical energy as chemical energy. So you actually use the electricity to drive a chemical reaction, and that's how a battery works. So inside a battery is a chemical reaction. You might have heard like lithium-ion batteries coming on board, and so there's actually a chemical reaction that happens inside and gets stored. The lithium-ion actually gets joins to one electrode and then comes out and then joins to the other electrode and actually travels through the battery. So there's ions actually, that's actual atoms that are traveling through the battery to each electrode and back again. That's how you store the energy in a lithium-ion battery. But in an ultra capacitor, what happens is we actually store the charge as electrical charge. So you think of like two plates together with an insulator in between, and when you put a voltage across that, it can tear some electrons off one side and add them to the other side. You end up with this differential of charge across, and it gets stored as a voltage across the charge in the capacitor. Does that make sense? So capacitors actually have some advantages and some disadvantages. Some of the advantages are you can charge them very, very quickly and discharge them very, very quickly, because you don't have these atoms that have to move through the matrix like in a battery. So in a battery, as you try and charge it faster and faster, it's harder and harder to get these charged ions to go through the lattice, and so that actually slows them down, and the battery heats up and it gets hot, and then eventually it catches fire, and that's not a good thing when you're trying to drive a car. So there's limits to how fast you can charge and discharge a battery, but with capacitors, they're much more efficient in the charge and discharge cycle, and you're only throwing electrons around. Electrons can actually move through wires much faster, and so you can charge and discharge a capacitor much faster. And you can also charge and discharge a capacitor through all of its range. Okay, so if you have a phone and the battery's in your phone, you'll see that when you go to charge it, you might notice that it charges up quite quickly until it gets like to about 80% charge, and then it will slow down. Yeah? And so it's best to operate a lithium-ion battery right in the middle of its range. Okay, if you want to get the best lifespan out of your phone battery, you should only operate it between about 20 and 80% charge. So you take it off the charger when it gets to about 80%, and when it's discharging, you try and put it back on the charger before it gets to about 20%. And then you'll actually increase the lifespan of the battery in your phone by quite a lot. Okay? I know a lot of people who are used to something called a NiCad battery. NiCad batteries, which used to be in your little portable phone that you would have connected to your phone system, those batteries have a very different behaviour, and they would get something called memory, And so it was always good on a NiCad battery to drain the battery all the way to empty so you could recharge it so it didn't start to get the memory effect. Don't do that with lithium-ion batteries, okay? If you do that with your lithium, so if you think, my phone battery is getting a little bit low, what I need to do is a complete discharge to like clear it out and reset the memory thing. Memory doesn't happen with lithium-ion batteries, and when you do that, all you do is shorten the lifespan of the battery. Okay, so the more you can keep your lithium-ion battery in your phone in the middle of its charge range, the happier you'll be. And same for a car. But ultracapacitors are different. They're quite happy to go through their entire charge range, and they can go through thousands to millions of cycles. So why aren't we using ultracapacitors? If they charge much faster, you can put them through that many more cycles without actually degrading them. Why aren't we all on capacitors? And the answer is because they don't hold as much energy as a battery does per unit weight. Okay, so if you wanted to have a capacitor in your phone that was the same sort of storage as your battery, then you'd have like a phone that was this big to have the capacitor. Okay, so at the moment, and so what's happening is both techs are moving faster. So the capacitor people are working hard to increase the capacity, and the battery people are working hard to increase the rate at which it charges and discharges, and they're both sort of approaching each other to this glorious thing which has amazing amounts of charge and lasts forever and charges really quickly and all that kind of stuff. So that battery technology and the ultracapacitor technology is getting on further and further. So in the trams at the moment, they all have an ultracapacitor sitting in the roof of those, and what they do is actually put little charge stations at each of the stops, so you don't need a massive battery because it just goes that far and then recharges itself and goes that far and recharges itself and that far and recharges itself. Okay, so every time it stops up, you'll see a little pantograph come up, recharges just enough to get to the next stop, and then it'll go to the next stop and recharge itself and go to the next stop. Interesting. Okay, so that's quite, that means we don't have to have the overhead wires for our trams. It makes the streets nice and clear and all that kind of stuff, and it's much nicer to be around.
Yes.
Okay, cool. Right, and so something that you might not have seen yet is, remember in the previous slide, we had this little autonomous shared vehicle thing, and that seems a bit sort of futuristic and crazy. Well, have a look at this. If we can make it go. So this is currently sitting in the depot at Newcastle. Takes a bunch of different people in it, and it's going to actually be running a little trial around Nobby's Beach. So it's sort of something can come up and run around Nobby's Beach, and so in the future you'll be able to jump on this autonomous vehicle and it will drive you around Nobby's Beach, basically. Okay, so that's the first bit of the council really testing what's happening with autonomous vehicles. So this is a vehicle that will drive itself and take up to about 9 passengers. So think of this as like a little minibus that you can get on and get off that will drive itself. It'll actually have a person in the car for the trial that'll be overlooking things, so don't panic. Like all of these things, we need to do risk mitigation when rolling out new technology, and so there'll be a person whose job is to actually oversee the vehicle and make sure everything's happening as this new technology comes on. So basically, what we're doing is saying, instead of a driver being in charge, the vehicle's being in charge, and just like if you had a learner driver, you would want to oversee the learner driver in their early years and make sure everything's comfortable before you give them their P plates and let them drive by themselves. This is the same thing. So now we're teaching a computer to drive or an AI to drive, and just like someone with a learner, we actually have to teach it how to drive and then make sure that it drives how we'd like it to drive and we're comfortable with it. We've done all the risk assessments, and then you can go and let it drive by itself. So we're in that sort of phase now of letting it drive by itself, but with someone overseeing. Okay, so think of it like as having L plates on and driving around. Okay? Yep, sure.
Does that car, do they have a bit of noise about them when they operate, or they totally silent?
So there's been new legislation brought in Europe, and probably comes over to Australia at all. It says for all electric cars, when they get below 15 kilometres an hour, so above 15 kilometres an hour, the tyres actually make most of the noise on the road for a car, not the engine. But below that, then the motor actually takes place. And so there's now rules that say for electric cars travelling less than 15 kilometres an hour, they actually have to emit a small sound for people to actually hear it as it drives along. So people are thinking about those kind of things. So these are all the things when you start to bring these things into operation. Like every single car manufacturer has tried to make quieter and quieter and quieter cars, and some electric cars have come along that's like really quiet, and people go, oh, maybe there is such thing as too quiet, maybe we need to make it slightly noisy. Yeah. So that'll be the same thing for, well, bicycles have always been the same thing, but for your hybrid cars that you buy, so if you're like get like a Prius or something like that, or now a Camry, those kind of things, they're a hybrid car, and when you're driving really slow, they'll drive just in electric mode, and so they can be quite quiet as well. And so they're starting to think about regulations around that, about creating, and different car companies are coming up with different sounds to try and, because on the one hand, you don't want to make the car so irritating. Like, yes, I hear it coming, but it irritates me so much. So you want to try and find this sound which is, you can hear, you can identify, but isn't so irritating that you want to say, turn off all these sounds, and can we have those nice petrol cars back that make all of those noises that we're comfortable with because we've heard them before. So it's trying to find that right balance.
Could always just...
Okay, I need to speak louder, do I? Yeah. Okay, sorry, I was going to my small room. It'll be fine. Usually when I talk one-on-one, I lower my voice a little bit. Now I'll talk louder. We're good. Right, so... we've done that one. Right, so... As part of that, once you get that vehicle that goes around, that vehicle is now a shared vehicle. So there's more than one person using it. So trying to organise everybody to use the vehicle, because that tram just goes on a track. And so you know exactly where it goes. If you've got a bus, the bus follows a bus route, and so you know where it goes. But if you've got one of these smaller vehicles that can drive itself, it can now be on demand. So that means you need to be able to tell it where you are, tell it where you want to go, and then if it wants to get the most efficiency out of that, it's going to have a unique bus route that it's just decided at that single point in time to pick up you and pick someone else and take them over there and drop all these people off. So it's like this continually evolving bus route. So that's obviously a big problem. That's a data problem now. You actually got all this data coming in. You've got to work out where people are, where they want to go to. How do I on the fly route my bus trip to go all the right places? So that means it's a computer and a software problem. And so some things help. Like, so now, we all have one of these things sitting in our pocket. That's a really good way to know where you are and to tell someone where you want to go to. So if you pull out it, you fire up the app, you say, I'm here, because it'll already know you're here because it's got a GPS in your phone. You say, I want to go to there, and then it'll be able to work out who else in the system wants to go in the same direction, and then be able to allocate a bus to come there, so it'll pick you up within, like 2 minutes or so, and take you exactly where you want to go, maybe via one other stop with another person on the way. Okay, so that's a data problem. So there's now lots of people working on that data problem of how to create the right app to control everything together in the background. And that also means things like knowing that there's a morning peak hour and all these people like to go from here to here in that morning, so I need to reallocate the cars ready for that to happen, and then in the evening they'll go over here, so I need to reallocate the cars there. To do all that sort of big level planning as well as all the micro route calculations. And so there's lots of different companies that are doing that. And the one I'm going to talk about here very quickly is one called Liftango. Why am I mentioning Liftango? It turns out they're actually a Newcastle company, so that's exciting. So they're a Newcastle, a company that started in Newcastle. They've just finished an investment round. They've got quite a bit of money, so they're actually doing quite well. It's a really good example of some tech companies actually coming up in Newcastle and starting to actually work. So they started off with a ride-sharing one, which works just for people going to work. So if you all worked at the same place, like a big place like a university or a hospital or something like that, where lots of people were going in the same direction, it would start off by doing sort of like an automated carpooling thing, where you could say, okay, I live here, I'm going to go to there, and it would tell you all the other people in the system are going the same way and line you up with someone else so that you could carpool to work much easier and do a car sharing thing.
Do those little dots represent little coronaviruses that get shared amongst everybody?
No. I have a suspicion that wasn't actually part of that. But that's the same for any public transport.
Sure.
Okay. So what this is doing now is positioning you in a place where it's much easier. Someone else does all of the thinking for you and all of the logistics organisation for you to have a shared trip. And shared trips are great. Why? Because it reduces the number of vehicles on the road, because you need a fewer number of vehicles to do the same job. And that gives you two big advantages. One big advantage that means is that traffic congestion gets reduced. So if we all own our private passenger vehicle and we all decide to get an autonomous private passenger vehicle and we say, this is great because I don't have to get a park anymore, I can now get my car to drive me to work and then say, go home and come and pick me back up. What you've actually done is just double the number of trips. And so that's actually increased congestion, hasn't decreased congestion. Whereas if you start sharing the vehicle, you can reduce the number of vehicles you need to do the same transport job. And so you can actually reduce congestion, which means you don't have to spend so much anymore on building new roads and building new freeways and all this great expense we have on infrastructure cost, because our current infrastructure does a much better job. Plus you don't have to park the car in the city. So for every car that you own, you also want, you have a car park at home to keep it in. You have this whole room in your house just for your car. You then actually, when you want to go somewhere, you actually want to make sure that someone has set aside a piece of public property for you just to park your car personally. And so as soon as you move to this mode, and suddenly all of those parking lanes on the side of the road can now be freed up to be cycle lanes or can be extra wide paths or things like that. And at home, you get an extra room in your house for free. You can now change your garage to something else. Okay, so there's lots of advantages if we can make this work. And so Lift Tango is a great local company that's trying to do exciting stuff. What I'm going to talk the rest of today about, though, is iSee. And we're going to talk a little bit about the evolution. So this is what would happen, though, because you get in your car to go somewhere, and a lot of those times you get in your car to go somewhere to meet somebody, to talk to them. What if you didn't have to travel anymore? What if you could actually meet them virtually instead? Now, I've got to say that our philosophy as a company is that face-to-face is gold. You can't beat a face-to-face connection with another human. That's the most important thing. So what we are trying to do in the company is to make sure we bring as much of that face-to-face capability to people who it's logistically difficult to meet face-to-face. Okay, so instead of saying, I now can't meet anybody, you're saying, well, now I can meet the people I was going to meet before. It's just not going to be quite as good as face-to-face, but as good as we can possibly make it.
And very healthy.
And good for the environment, healthy, and you don't...
Well, no coronavirus. No
Right.
coronavirus.
This is an important question right now, because our major target market at the moment is actually education, where we have people using it to bring people together in distance education and other things. And so you'll have aware that Australia has a large number of overseas students that come. It's actually one of our biggest export industries. And now as we sort of block them from travelling to Australia because we're about coronavirus, we're actually undermining one of our major export industries. And so people are scrambling to work out how to fix this problem. Okay, so let's talk about the evolution of the ways that people used to talk to each other. Okay, so some people remember this. What I'm going to talk about this is because education is a major market. I'm going to talk about this from an education perspective a little bit. And so a lot of you would have heard of School of the Air previously, yeah? So this is where people are in sort of like HF radio and those sort of things, like really long transmission distance where they can actually bounce off the inside of the ionosphere. So they send a radio signal up, it hits the bottom of the ionosphere and actually bounces back down, so you can actually send the radio signals over the horizon. And so that means you can transmit for quite long distances. And so, for the Australian outback and those sort of places, you can now have students being connected together. The hassle for that is, one is, well, first the bandwidth is very limited. So the amount of information you can send along that pathway is very limited. So you can't send video, you can't send pictures, you can't send any of that sort of stuff. But you can send voice, but there's really only one voice channel per for all of the people that are on it. So once you get onto a channel, only one person can really speak at once on the channel, and then they overlap each other. Okay, so there's limitations on how many people can use a channel at the same time. So no video, no audio, so you can't see their pretty face. You can talk to them, but you can't send pictures, you can't send data, you can't send all those other. But for the time, it was a big step forward. So then, who here has actually used some sort of like video conferencing app, maybe on your phone? Like you've used Facebook Messenger, or you've used Skype, FaceTime. Yeah. So if you're an Apple person, you're on FaceTime.
Viber, WeChat,
WeChat.
WhatsApp.
Okay. So there's lots of these ones now that start to be able to use a digital communications channel rather than wires, rather than HF wireless. Can send a lot more data down the same channel, which means now that channel can carry video and it can carry pictures and it can carry all those other things that make things interesting. So if you're in a video chat with someone, you can now see their video. But that video carries quite a bit of data with it, so if you try and talk to lots of people at once, that can overwhelm your data connection. So it's kind of difficult. So if I was to try and talk to all of you at once, I'd have to download, like 30 or 40, how many about, let's say 40 video streams at once. And my poor little home internet connection is going to go, and so it'll break up and have problems. And then as we're trying to talk, only one of us can talk at once, because there's only one, doesn't matter how many people connect to the call, only one person can speak at once without speaking over the top of somebody. Okay, so that limits the number of things that we can say, which is all right for what we call a one-to-many. So I'm talking to all of you, and it's okay for a one-to-one. So if someone's talking to somebody else, but it doesn't work for what we call many-to-many. So that tea, when we just had that tea break then, that was a many-to-many conversation. There was lots of conversations happening in parallel in the same room, weren't there? So that can't happen on this kind of system. So it's great. You can see people's faces. You can, it now works on an app on your phone, so you can actually, talk to your grandkids via your phone and see their faces and all that kind of stuff. Fantastic big advance, but it still has some limitations in that it can't do the many-to-many. So, what have other people been working on? So, when we want to think about how we do the many-to-many stuff, we start to think about how do we do the many-to-many. And it turns out that in the real world, what we do is we use space to divide up our conversations. Okay, if I want to have a private conversation with you in a big group, I bring you off to the side over here, and then we have a conversation with each other, and because the sound actually dies out with distance in the physical world and has direction, we can sort of isolate our conversation just by being a little bit distance apart from each other in the physical environment. So if we want to be able to do a many-to-many conversation, we actually have to bring the physics of the environment back into action to make that work. Okay? So what we end up doing is creating virtual reality. We create a virtual world, and then we can move around inside the virtual world, and we can use the physics of sound in the virtual world just to mimic the physics of sound in the physical world. So we create a 3D virtual world, and then we can move around inside the virtual world. Yeah? So then we've got the challenge of how do we represent you inside the virtual world. So just like you've all come to this physical space to talk to each other today, you would come to a virtual 3D world to talk to each other, but I have to represent you in the world so you know who you're talking to. An avatar. Who's heard of the word avatar before? So the avatar is what represents you in the virtual world. Okay? And so we're going to talk a little bit about how that might happen. But just to make the world much more complex for you, I'm going to talk about, instead of being reality and virtual reality, there's actually some stuff in between, which is really interesting. So if we have a look at this is actually a picture from Intel. You can see here that this is reality. Hopefully we're all in reality now. Fingers crossed. It's always hard to tell. There's also things called virtual reality. So if you go to the grandkids and you see them at home playing like an online multiplayer game, like a first-person shooter game or something, you might see them playing, your Call of Duty or something like that. That's a completely virtual world, and everybody when they go into that world is represented by a virtual avatar. So it's completely virtual. So they'll come in as a character, and their character will be represented in the world. When they see someone else, they'll see another character. Okay, so the 3D gaming world, multiplayer gaming world, has been doing this for quite a while, but they do it to play games. And so that's all in virtual reality. So we're in reality, you're playing Call of Duty, we're all in virtual reality. There's some stuff in between. Has anyone heard of augmented reality before? So augmented reality is where you have the base world is the virtual world, and you insert, the base world is the real world, and you insert virtual objects in it. So you can do there's some commercial stuff available for this. So some places will let you get your iPad, look at your room, and then if you're buying a new couch, they'll send you the couch, and you can actually then position the couch where you think in your room and actually sit. So what they've got as a virtual thing, which is the couch. It's a little bit of data that looks like a couch, and you can then use the camera on your phone to get a picture of what the real world looks like, and then insert that picture into there, and in real time you can have a look to see what it might look like. Okay, so that's augmented reality. That's these little bits of the virtual sitting inside the real. So the camera on your machine captures the real, and you can insert a little bit of the virtual. There's another way to do that, and we'll talk about again later. But then there's actually another way of doing things, and that's to flip that. And that's, instead of being called augmented reality, okay, so the base world is reality and you're augmenting reality, you're adding something to reality, you can actually go the other way. You can have something called augmented virtuality. So you can have the base world is actually a completely virtual world, but you can add little bits of the real into the virtual world. Makes sense? It's the other way around. So adding little bits of the real, you can take a real live video of something and insert it into a virtual environment. Does that make sense? It's a bit to get your head around. So let's see how that might actually manifest itself. So here, if you're, so some of you are on Facebook, yeah? So if you actually get a head-mounted display, so this is instead of having a screen that sits on a wall like a TV, you actually get a display that you put right up here against your eyes and connects to your head, and then that has a motion sensor in it, so it actually tells where you look. As you look around, it'll actually pan your vision inside the virtual world, and so it'll be just like you're sitting, something transformed into a world that's somewhere else, a completely virtual space. And you can look around inside that world and talk to other people, and the sound is connected to which direction your head points, so it all looks like you just suddenly get immersed in this virtual world. So in this particular picture, you can see a bit of everything. So what's happening is, this here in the background, it looks like you're in a house. It's actually not a house. What that is they've actually taken something like this. So this is a 360 camera. This is a camera which actually takes, you can see it's got a lens on this side and a lens on this side. So each lens takes a 180-degree sphere, and then it stitches those together. And so that can get you a 360-degree image. So that's actually, think about, who's been to like a planetarium before? So a planetarium has this like dome roof, and then it projects the image up onto the dome roof. Yeah, so this will sort of like take an image that it's not just a half dome, it'll take a full 360-degree bowl. And so what's happened is they've taken one of these cameras, they've gone into their living room, and then they've made that the world. So that's the virtual world, is actually an image from the camera. And then what they've done is to say, okay, we need to meet in this virtual world now. And so they've had to give an avatar to the person. So you notice here that one is an avatar, and this is actually a live video stream from like Facebook Messenger. So if you know anything about Facebook, you'll know that it's actually owned by Mark Zuckerberg. So this is Mark Zuckerberg's avatar. And this is actually him calling his wife, who's actually Priscilla Chang, who's a doctor, who's working in a hospital at the time. So what you can see is there's this virtual world, which is actually this 360-degree picture they're meeting inside of. He's represented by a live avatar of himself. So this is looks like a cartoon. And she's actually coming in as a live video feed. Okay? So this bit here, the question is, why does he look kind of like a cartoon? She looks like a real person. So there's this weird thing that happens, it's called the uncanny valley. Okay? The uncanny valley. Uncanny. And they're like, oh, that's a bit uncanny. So the uncanny valley. So what is the uncanny valley? So it turns out that if I was to just get like, two fingers up here and put a little dot on top and do this, you can anthropomorphize that. You can actually now think of that as a character, like a little puppet, and you can give it all of these human characteristics and think about it and all this kind of stuff. And so you can watch cartoons and be very relaxed. Okay? As I make that little puppet look more and more and more like a real person, eventually your brain flips and stops thinking about it as a puppet that you're giving human characteristics to, and starts to actually think about it like a real person. Now it turns out that you've got all these inbuilt things inside you to make you, when you meet someone, to very quickly assess how they're going. So if you meet someone who has a really bad disease or is dead or any of those kind of things, you actually, when you see them, you feel revulsion. You go like, oh. And that's a really good reason for that. That's so when someone does get coronavirus and die, you see them and you actually want to stand away from them so you don't get that disease. So that's actually built into the core of you. That's a core thing.
Part of your software.
Part of your software. Part of your hardware, actually, because we don't have software. We have hardware is software nowadays. So there's this thing where suddenly, if your brain stops thinking about it as being a cartoon and starts thinking about it being as a person, but it's not quite right. It's not exactly right. It's just a little bit off. then that triggers revulsion in you. So you go like, oh, isn't that nice, isn't that nice? And it's like, oh! And that's bad. So that's why it's called the uncanny valley. If you actually have a video or a picture of someone, it's a real picture or a real video, that's perfectly fine. You can handle that. So real you can handle, cartoon you can handle, almost real is actually bad. Okay? So it's this valley where it goes better, 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 terrible, better. And so in this picture, we've got an example of both sides. They have an example of a video, perfectly fine. It's real. They have a cartoon, perfectly fine, it's a cartoon. And so Facebook's done an enormous amount of work to try and work out how they can make a cartoon that kind of looks like you, your friends can recognize you if they already know you, but it's not so real that it makes you feel revolted.
So the example of the uncanny valley mean you kind of get monster figures on the screen.
Not quite, that triggers something else. That triggers just fear of a dangerous thing. But you'll notice that you might not have heard that when some new movies came out, like the Star Wars movies and those kind of things. If you looked at the second last movie, there was like a picture of Princess Leia when she was young, and that was computer generated. And a lot of people went like, "Ooh, that doesn't look quite right." You know, I can recognise it's Carrie Fisher, but it doesn't look quite right, and so you feel a bit revulsed. And so in the last Star Wars movie they made, they sort of said, we will not have any CGI generated figures, we will just use whatever footage we have to make that movie work, because we don't want to trigger all these weird things in the middle of the movie. Because it's really hard to do. Things like, you know, if you don't get just the right glistening on their teeth when they open up and your teeth, you know, got a little bit of mucus on them, they shine with lights. If you don't get that exactly right and the colour of their teeth is off, they go, ooh, okay, that's not quite right. Okay? All those things. So Facebook's done a lot of work to make sure that their virtual avatars, so because in Facebook you're already connected to the person before you actually go in here, so you already know that they're a friend of yours. So from Facebook's perspective, if you've met them in real life, you should be able to recognise them in their avatar. But it doesn't work the other way. If you've met them in their avatar and then you met them in real life, you wouldn't necessarily know it's the same person. Okay? So, if you wanted to then work out how to take this to the next level for like sort of business meetings or something formal, you don't want everyone turning up as a cartoon, but you actually want to make sure that your meeting in the virtual world is just a complete continuation of your meeting in the physical world. Okay, that's what video conferencing is. Video conferencing is, I've seen you in the real world, I've seen you in video, it's just the same. It's just one continuous relationship. There's no difference about where you meet them. And so the people are working on how do you get video into that virtual environment and then be able to scale it up. Now, at the moment that's a 2D video, some other people are working on 3D video. So if you have a look here, this is actually another way of doing augmented reality. So instead of having a head-mounted display which is completely filled in, so you've got big screens sitting in front of your eyes so you can't actually see the real world, what you can do is to get some glass that goes down that you see through, so it's just like having glasses on, so you're seeing through it, but then you can actually reflect another image off the glass and into your eye, so you can actually see the real world and then have little pictures that get inserted inside of that. So that's an augmented reality headset as opposed to a virtual reality headset. So Microsoft has been working on a product called their HoloLens, and that's actually an augmented reality headset. And along with that, they've been working on some capture technology, where if you get another person, you can surround them in cameras, you can actually capture them in 3D, and then try and then transport that whole 3D image into the video, into your field of view, so you can have a virtual person that's captured live inside your field of view. Something like that. Now you can see here that this is the real person with the head-mounted display on, and you can see this is the captured one, which is captured by their system. You see it's still not quite right. Okay, so they've had to capture it with lots of cameras, but because there's so much data, it's hard to send that down, so they've had to smooth everything out, and in smoothing everything out, they've lost some of the sort of skin tones and textures and things, and it looks a little bit sort of cartoonish. So sort of they're playing with the uncanny valley there. They're almost getting it right and not quite sure. Okay, but this is one of those ways of actually seeing that. So in this particular field, the head-mount display you're using actually has what's called inside-out tracking. So it has cameras which look out into the room and can use that to position itself and orient itself. So as you turn around and look, it can keep that position of the person stable in the room. So it'll look like they appear there, and whenever you look at them, they're in the same place, and if they have to move around, they get to control how they move around, not you. Okay? Get interesting. So let me now bring you on to what we're doing. So when you start to have video in the environment, one of the issues is that video has a lot of data with it. So if you try and have a big meeting with everybody here like this, then that's enormous amounts of data. And so trying to have a meeting on your home internet connection with a whole group of people becomes difficult because there's an enormous amount of data. So that's one of the limitations of why we don't necessarily have all of this happening at the moment. There's so much data streaming in that you can't control. So what we work on is how do you manage all of that data so you can have large groups of people in at once. And so this is what we do. So we've actually worked out how to manage all of those data feeds at once so that you can have large groups of people, like 40 or 50 people inside an environment at the same time with their live video feed that comes in from their webcam. So not only is that their live video feed from your webcam, but the audio is spatial in the environment as well, so you can have lots of conversations. So these people over here can have a local conversation, these people over here can have a local conversation, and the sound dies out with distance inside the environment, just like I did here. So when you have that coffee break where you all split up in little groups and had a chat and caught up to each other all in parallel, you can do that inside these environments now. With a live video feed from the person and the audio dies out, you can have this many-to-many conversation. So that's the technology that we're working on, and the first place we're trying to develop that for is for education. So this is to help kids who, first of all, are isolated from other people and so need to be able to, so actually personal development is a critical part of the K-12 curriculum. And so they need to come in and talk to other people and socialise with other kids. But also, one of the ways of learning is called peer learning pedagogy. So learning from friends, getting together as a group, which is what you guys do. You all come together as a group and you learn in pairs and in groups. And that's one of the most effective ways to learn, is to learn off your friends. So this allows you to have a class and very easily break up into small groups and be able to talk to each other and bring specialist teaching and expertise into other environments. Okay, so there's two things you can do there. So one thing is you can bring people together that couldn't meet each other normally. So these guys are actually from, in New South Wales, there's a selective high school called Aurora College. And that's for kids who are out in a regional school where they want to stay in their local area, but maybe they want to do something like, advanced maths. And there's no other students in their school that want to do advanced maths, and there's no teacher that's good enough to teach advanced maths because they're too busy doing other things. It's really hard to schedule, really expensive to deliver advanced maths to just that one student. So what happens is they go to the school for most of their subjects, and then while they're at school, they actually go on the computer and visit a virtual high school, and then they meet up with the other students there. They can get enough students together to form a class, and they do that one subject online. So they can spend most of their time in their local school with all their friends and things, and then still pick up that advanced maths or advanced English course that they want to do without having to leave their school environment. Okay, so it brings accessibility and better opportunity to kids who are in regional Australia and don't have that access to opportunity normally. What we can also do, so that's an environment, you see that environment looks a little bit like a beach, so we built a world for them that looks kind of like a beach, so they're fun and relaxed. It doesn't rain inside the virtual world, so you don't have to have buildings and sky and all that kind of stuff, so you can meet wherever you want, so you can make fun learning environments and they can meet inside that.
And if it does rain in the virtual world, you won't get wet.
That's true. And so here on the other side, there are some things where people want to do training, but the actual structure of the physical world is quite important for the training. So things like, this is actually the inside of a courtroom, for example. So for lawyers coming on, they actually need to work out, it's not just a matter of learning the law, but it's also how to operate inside a courtroom. So inside a courtroom, of course, the judge sits over there, and the defence sits over there, and the prosecution sits over there, and the jury sits over there. And it's very important to know where you sit and who you talk to and all those kind of things and get that feel. And so for distance education students who are trying to study the law by distance, it's important to have access to these worlds that are the right shape. So because it's the virtual world, you can build whatever world you want. So you can build a 3D virtual world that mimics whatever training environment you want. Make sense? Okay, so this is to give you a little bit of a look at how this works. These are engineering students who are having a meeting. This is just a GIF of that, or a GIF if you say it like that. So you can see a few different things. One is they can move around inside the environment, so everybody gets to control where they are. It's playing their live video feed. And we'll see this later, but you can also have inside the virtual world, you can have virtual screens. So just like you've got a data projector here, going up and putting some things on a wall, inside the virtual world, you can do the same thing. But of course here, data projectors cost money. And so if you wanted to have 3 or 4 data projectors up on the wall, here it will cost you extra money, but in the virtual world they're free. So you can have as many virtual screens as you want operating on the wall at the same time.
It's that fun zooming in and out. Why is he going?
So this is just a little film clip that's just on loop.
Oh, right.
Okay? So this person has come over here, just showing them actually position themselves over here, and then come back and then a minute plays it another loop. Okay?
He's not hyperactive.
No, it looks like that. I've had a few kids in my class.
Looks better.
Some of them are right outside right now.
Yeah.
So you can see this little green bar here, but you can see there's other people in the background over here. So they're having their own conversation over here. There's these people in the background over here. So you've got multiple presentations and groups working together in the same space at the same time.
But it also shows that people can move around, and that's what they look like when someone's moving around.
So in these environments, just like in the physical world, so when you came in here today and you had tea, you could decide who you wanted to talk to and when you wanted to talk to them simply by moving over to them and then starting to talk to them. It's very intuitive. So exactly the same thing happens inside the virtual world. You can actually steer yourself around in the virtual world. If you want to go and talk to someone, you just steer yourself up to them and say, hi, how are you going? Works just the same.
You just look like a Polaroid photo.
So remember we said face-to-face is gold? So we try and have as much face-to-face as possible, and then when they want to bring in either specialist teaching that can't make it in, or aggregate students, or have distance students, then they'll use this in sort of parallel to face-to-face communication. They'll both. I think yes, because schools actually play 2 different roles, yeah? So schools are about educating our children, yes, but they play a very other important role. That other important role is it's state-sponsored childminding, which then frees up the adults to become more productive members of society. Okay, so our economy is actually dependent on the ability to free up our parents in their good working years to go and work and be productive individuals. So it's a way of corralling our students together where only like 1 or 2 people can actually look after huge groups of kids, which frees up their parents to go and be productive members of society. So will school end like this? The answer is no, because childminding is a critical part of school in terms of value to the economy. So think about this as bringing additional opportunity to kids that are in schools, and making sure that the tyranny of distance, for kids, that means that kids in cities don't get better opportunities than kids in regional cities. So it tries to make that. Here's another example of having the screens inside the environment. So you can have big screens right outside in the environment. And does anyone recognise this particular program that's running here?
Excel or something?
Has anyone used Microsoft OneNote before?
Yes.
Okay, so this is actually OneNote, and a OneNote file, if you have Office 365, for example, Office 365 has a cloud drive, and if you have your stuff synced to the cloud drive, to OneDrive it's called, don't want to be an advert for Microsoft, you can do almost the same thing with Google as well, so if you're in G Suite, that's fine. But you can have these cloud documents that are shared amongst people. When you put that up on the board, it means you can work together on the document on the board. So you can collaborate together, working together, some people writing stuff and other people writing stuff. So this computer here, for example, this computer here has a touch screen and it's got a pen input. So I can write directly on the screen. So inside this 3D world, if I come up and I'm looking at this on my computer, I can see this in front of me and I can just go up and write directly on the board and everybody else can see what I'm writing directly on the board. So it works just like it would if you've actually got a board in the real world. Okay, so we're trying to bring all of that real world functionality into the virtual world to make it really just simple and intuitive for teachers and students to be able to come together and do what they've always done inside classrooms, but now in a virtual classroom, and the teachers and students can come from anywhere. So making well, if I just scroll up, this environment here, Aurora College, one of the reasons they use us is actually just for playtime. So they don't actually have necessarily structured courses inside the environment. They have these classes of kids, and what they realise, the kids don't get to socialise, and so because they're drawn from all over the state, so they actually just have playtime. They just let them go in, run around with each other, just like if they're playing online multiplayer game with each other, but now they can see the actual other child there, they can talk to them like they're a real person, and so they can start to develop those friendships. So if you want to develop a friendship with someone, you actually use space to develop the friendship. So no one makes friends in a video conference. Okay, if you've got like 50 people in a video conference and only one person speak at once, you don't make friends in that environment. Okay, you make friends by saying, okay, there's like 40 people here, but I'm going to isolate you from the crowd, I'm going to talk to you one-on-one, and that's how we know we're each other's special. I could talk to all these people, but I'm going to choose to talk to you, and because I'm investing in you and you're investing in me, that's what makes us friends. Okay, so we actually use space to invest in particular individuals, and it's as we invest that we create friendships. So unless you get to move around and choose who you want to talk to, and when you want to talk to them, you don't get the opportunity to build relationships. And so this is why this is very different in how it operates. It's not just video conferencing where you get to communicate with each other, you actually get choice about how you interact with other people, who you interact, and can build relationships. Not quite as energetic as the people outside, yes. But you can run around and jump over things, and we have, when we first made this environment, we had a few little glitches in the environment. It turns out that if they do specific things, so like the world is not infinite, it's got a boundary to it, but we put these sort of like invisible walls up so they can't go outside the environment. But it turns out the invisible walls are only so high, and if they team up with each other, they can actually jump their avatars on top of each other and escape from the environment. And there's a few little places where we left some gaps open accidentally that let them escape out of the environment. And so the teachers brought this up with us. They said, oh, you know, the students are escaping from the environment every now and then. And we went, oh my God, that's terrible. Let's work out where the problems are. And they said, we're not going to tell you where the gaps are because this is the best team building activity we've ever had for the kids. Because they actually have to team up together to be able to escape from the environment. So we're not going to tell you where all the gaps are, just know that there is, and that's important to us. So don't patch them if you do find
Turns it into a game.
So it turns it into a game, but they just have fun. And we've been working on other projects like, you know, virtual soccer, where we put a soccer ball in, they can run and kick the ball against, you know, just by running into it, they can play soccer with each other. And they play. There's actually inside the game you can have a laser pointer where you laser point, and so they play laser tag with each other. There's lots of things they do. Okay, so that's the virtual screens. And what I'm going to do is just finish by playing you a quick video of how it's actually being used. So at the moment, the Department of Education Queensland have bought this. It's rolled out. It's on every single computer across the whole of the Department of Education Queensland. We have major trials running in New South Wales. And so what I'm going to do is to show you very quickly some ways of how it's actually being used in the Department of Education Queensland. So let me just click play on this and hopefully
Good afternoon, everyone. We are short a few students this afternoon, but we're going to get started.
Okay, IC students, it is time for us to get our lesson started. We've got a busy schedule and heaps of super cool new stuff to learn. This is the last lesson of our IC license.
And where my laser is pointing, up on the right-hand side of that left-hand whiteboard, if you can snap that out onto your screen and then press spacebar for me and jump and let me know you're ready to move on. Awesome, you guys are so super fast.
You should be able to see me up on one of the big screens on megaphone, like where my laser is pointing right now.
So welcome to lesson 3 of our mining innovation.
So as I said, welcome to lesson 4, the last lesson of our IC license.
So for today, you're going to be listening to each other. You're going to be questioning some of the devices that we present to you, and you're going to be making some decisions. You'll be using iSeeVC and you'll be using Padlet today as well.
Just as any normal classroom, our expectations are exactly the same. So you need to make sure you're following my instructions nice and carefully. It's fantastic to hear that the noise level is so quiet in here right now, even though you've got your microphones on. That's exactly what we're looking for. Well done. We need to make sure we're always listening when your teacher or someone else in the room has been asked to speak. We're very respectful. We're working hard at staying on task. There's lots of independent work to do today, so we're going to need to make sure we're adhering to that really carefully.
Okay, so our groups today, we are going to have Lachlan, Georgia and Amy head over to the whiteboard near the numbers for me where my laser is pointing. And you're going to flip through that whiteboard. I'll get Miss Potts to unlock that whiteboard for you and find out what your topic is, and very shortly we'll share a Padlet with you.
So today, by the end of this lesson, what we want to be able to do is, we've already done some sharing on the whiteboards last lesson or two, and what we want to be doing this lesson is logging into a website called Tinkercad and learning how to use it, and then reflecting on our IC skills. And we're going to be thinking like explorers, collaborating and doing some investigating on how to use some new techniques. We'll be working in IC and we'll be working on the online Tinkercad platform.
Awesome. So just use the time that you have to find out how automated trucks are used, are they important, and then any accidents using them, who would use them, okay? That's what you need to find out. Thank you.
Can you hold it up and show me what you're doing so I can see?
And then when they're processing the coal, they wash it so when it like rains or something, it does, the dust doesn't spray out everywhere.
Okay, so that could be some of the ways that your grandchildren start to actually go to school. So this is mainly used in Queensland at the moment as part of what's called their Virtual STEM Academy. And so that's where you've got kids all through regional Australia who want to get better access to STEM, so science, technology, engineering and maths, better STEM education. So they have this group of teachers across the state who then deliver those programs out to regional Australia and bring them all this sort of special techniques about how you use like different online programs and things, and actually able to run that together as groups, teaching them together inside us. Lots of fun? Okay. So the head office for IC is actually down in Sydney and Barangaroo, and the whole business development team, which includes me and some colleagues, are actually up here working out of a space in the University of Newcastle. So it's all working. So that's it for today. I might try and set up on my machine very quickly an IC session for you, so if someone wants to come up and have a play, we'll let you have a go. Hopefully my connection will be fine. But one of the things that lets us happen is that we're able to minimise the amount of bandwidth, so the whole thing can run with a class of 50 kids on a satellite connection or on your mobile phone and those kind of things. So that's what makes the whole thing possible. Rightio, thank you. Great to talk to you again today.
And you said at the time that's the last car you'll ever have, and you still drive the same motor?
Still driving the same motor. But my electric motorcycle is almost finished. So I'm building my own electric motorcycle just for fun. That's almost done. It did get built once, then I broke it, so I'm rebuilding it. Yeah, so that's a really important question. So one of the other drivers for electric vehicles is trying to say, well, maybe they're better for the environment. And that answer is not as clear. Okay, so the answer is sometimes yes by a proportion, but they're not a magical solution that saves all your environmental problems. Okay, so if you think about a car, there's two big sources. Often we work on something called life cycle emissions. So in terms of the whole life cycle from producing the car to running the car and then doing end of life stuff, whether it's recycled or what happens to it. There's this sort of, if you think about the whole life cycle of a car, are electric cars much better or much worse than petrol cars? And often people think, oh, I'm driving an electric car, therefore I'm completely carbon neutral and everything's wonderful and I've saved the world. And the answer is it's not like that. Okay, so if you think about the production of the vehicle, so for any car, you know, the amount of emissions, so there's different kinds of emissions. There are CO2 emissions, so greenhouse gas emissions, and there's also particulate emissions. Okay, there's no doubt that the electric car wipes the floor on petrol cars for particulate emissions in cities. So in terms of noise pollution and particulate pollution, electric vehicles are much, much better. No doubt about that. In terms of greenhouse gas emissions, the question is a little bit different. And that's because there are more emissions in the production process for building an electric car than for building a petrol car. So there's less emissions, well, and it depends on your power source for when you're running the car as well. So if you're somewhere like in Scandinavia, where most of their power is actually from hydro, then that means their electricity system, hydro combination, it's not a hydro and nuclear, their electricity system is actually quite clean in terms of being very low emissions. And so it's much better in the operation emissions of the vehicle than petrol. There is a little bit more though to pay in the production. So actually there's more emissions during the production of the vehicle because you've got to produce the battery, although for Scandinavia that's built somewhere else so they can blame somebody else for that.
The production cost is more because it's a new technology like this working communication. And the other issue is practicability. They have a lot of filling stations on office car parks, on shopping centers and free plug-in systems. And everywhere on the road they have, whereas we don't have. So that's another issue which is
The answer to that one is yes and no. So if you think about an electric vehicle like you think about a petrol vehicle, you get a bit confused sometimes. So in a petrol vehicle, nobody has a fuel bowser at home unless you're in a big agricultural property somewhere. So that means that you're used to having a petrol tank which only fills up when you visit a petrol station. But every single home has an electric filling station at home. So that means that when you come home and plug your car in, every time you leave the house with a full petrol tank, an electric car. So that means that on a day-to-day basis, you don't actually need to stop into the petrol station anywhere because most of your trips are less than 30 kilometres, your car does much further than that. So on a day-to-day basis, you don't actually have to plug in at all in a filling station somewhere else because you've always charged up at home and left with a full fuel tank. It's only when you want to take long trips to somewhere, like you want to travel from here to Sydney or somewhere else, that you'll actually need to top up. So then you need a fast charging infrastructure to be able to do that. So if you bought a Tesla, one of the things that Tesla's done is two things. They've said, well, we'll put a very big battery in our car, not particularly good for emissions because you've actually had the emissions cost of actually building that big battery in the car, not good for price because you've had to pay for all of that battery in the car and it's quite expensive. But if you're happy to fork out the money, then now you have a car that can do 300 kilometres in a charge, but also they've actually then put in a fast charging network up the East Coast to overcome that problem so you can charge, stop in, wait half an hour, 40 minutes or something, your car can recharge and get to the next thing. So they've built an infrastructure to do that. If you're convincing yourself that that means you're magically clean and green because you bought a Tesla, the answer is you're not because the production cost, can be better, not necessarily can be better than a petrol car. It can actually be slightly worse. So if you're burning it mostly on brown coal, for example, your emissions are actually higher in an electric car than if you were just burning petrol. If you tick the 100% green box and renewable energy, yes, it's better. But the production emissions for producing the car are more than for a petrol car. Okay? So the best thing you can do if you want to lower your emissions is to either switch to a bicycle or share your car. If you can change the number of occupants in the car from the average, which is like 1.2 to 1.4, to something like 2.5 to 3, so that means car sharing, ride sharing. If you can do that, that's a much better way of reducing your emissions than actually deciding to buy an electric car in that respect. But you can do both. You can buy an electric car and both. And as we clean up the grid, then the electric car can buy.
Very, very interesting. Always, Dr Ellem gives us something to take away, to really think about.
No pressure. No pressure.
No pressure, but it does give us something to think about and something to work bunch of people. We'd like to thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, mate.
Are you guys up
Well, I always enjoy coming and talking to you guys, so thanks a lot for having me. Maybe in another 7 years, we can try again.
7 months.
Right.
But it just blows our mind, you know, all this. A lot of us use Skype and FaceTime, and we teach that at Computer Powers, but wow, that's just something else.
Well, I'll try and set it up very quickly, and if you want to come and have a play just for fun.
Right, thank you very much. Now, you all have a little ticket. Did Gary get a ticket? Did you get a little raffle ticket?
I did, but I feel like I should.
Oh, right. You've got to draw the first one.
And if it's mine, then I have to.
And they're all here.
Oh no, you can have some. That's the whole idea.
So it's an apricot ticket. Are they all apricot tickets?
They're all
the same colour.
All the same colour.
Just
Dead
a number.
38.
38.
38.
Radio Bob. But Bob, quickly come here and draw the next one. Got to be really quick.
Just take one out of there for the next person. Then you go.
Pass it over. The other way. Bob, pass. There we go.
You choose something out of there.
Down the end there, that's a little bag with a
Memory.
memory sticker. 27, Z27. Yep, come on over. Right, next one, yours. Okay, 47. Radio, come on, quick. Get your skates on. Good enough.